Welcome to the Dunamis EQ Podcast. Today I'm joined by Chichi. Chichi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Tolu.
My absolute pleasure. So you were referred to me by my namesake, Tolu, who I grew up with. Thank you so much for joining. Would love to just hear a little bit about you. If you tell the listeners a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so Chichi Eruchalu. I always love these kind of tell me about yourself things because there's like so many facets to who I am.
Yeah.
On a personal
Tell
level,
all of them. Tell all of them.
all the hats. So married, mum of two, got a 11-year-old daughter, an 8-year-old son. So she's off to secondary school in September, and it just feels crazy to think that I have a child that old now. I am a leadership coach. And also kind of a leadership consultant as well. So what I do on the coaching side, I work with founders, leaders, whether you're a first-time leader, like first-time manager, or maybe you've been doing a little bit while and maybe you're moving to the next level, managers, that sort of thing. So really working with you to help you understand yourself and helping you to become more effective leader, depending on the kind of responsibilities you have. My background really is around helping to scale teams. And so building inclusive and diverse teams at scale is something that I am really proud of doing. And then on the consulting side, I work with businesses to really help them, whether it's in terms of leadership training, so whether you're onboarding only managers or whether you think, okay, there's a particular thing we need to focus on with our managers and our leaders, so kind of creating the training for that, or delivering and facilitating training that's already in existence. So what I've found and what a lot of organizations have found is that the leaders are the real linchpins. If you think about individuals, there's that common phrase of, you lead your managers rather than your organization. So working with the leaders is really, really important because they set the tone, the culture, and everything that they do. So that's kind of what I do on a day-to-day. Prior to that, last 4 years I was working at EdTech. So when I joined there was around 50 of us. When I left, it was almost 1,000. So in that time, really got to kind of the hands-on leading at scale. So, I started with a team of 2. Within 18 months, I was managing 200 people. This was in the middle of COVID, lockdown, and when, everything's going on in the world, but also how do you ensure that we're still delivering results, but also looking after the people as well. And then prior to that, I spent 10 years at HSBC in a variety of roles. So I joined HSBC straight out of university. I went to university thinking I wanted to be an accountant. I had my first semester in accounting was Monday morning at 9. I was like, I don't enjoy accounting. And I realized I enjoyed business. I enjoyed being able to help solve problems. And when I look at the common thread and all the roles I do, essentially I'm solving problems and helping people to become more effective in what they're doing. So those two things are really combined together. So outside of my professional life, I enjoy writing. So you probably find me writing a lot on LinkedIn. I've written a book.
Really? What's your book about?
It's called If Only They Knew. So it's kind of documentally showing my journey from having a little side hustle, leaving my kind of corporate job and building a business and really how to do that. So I found when I was coaching at the time, not everybody can come and coach with you. So it was a kind of a great way to kind of take everything that's in here and put it into a book. And I also wanted to challenge myself to self-publish a book, which was brilliant. So
where's it available?
Amazon. We had it on Amazon. So,
that's amazing.
Every now and then Amazon were like, here are your little royalties from 7 years ago. I'm like, great.
Wait, so how long ago did you write it? 7 years ago?
7 years ago, 2017.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's amazing. Is it a paperback or is it an ebook?
It's paperback, so you can get it on Kindle or you can actually have the physical copy. So
amazing.
And I challenge everyone. Everyone has a book in you. So people will think, I can't write a book. Oh, I'd love to write a book, but go and you can definitely do that. So
we will put the link in the show notes.
Thank you. So that's a little bit about me. So I am hugely passionate about helping people unlock their gifts and be really effective. I also really enjoy working across teams and coaching has always just been something that I've had a heart for. I've always done, and before I even knew what coach, the name this is coaching. So.
As a fellow Nigerian, one of my first questions for you is: you are on track to be one of the big 4, so like accountant, doctor, lawyer, engineer. What was the switch from big 4, solid Nigerian career to something that's not within the big 4?
It's a good question. So I didn't make that switch to the big 4 until I'd been at HSBC for like 7 years.
Really?
So I went to university. I remember saying to myself, like, university is the final thing I'm doing for my parents. Like, I'm going to go to a good university, get a degree.
Okay. Yeah.
So I went to Durham, did business finance, and I was very clear, like, with the path I wanted to kind of follow. Like I said at the time, I wanted to work in finance. So I did this business finance degree. My second year, I was like, okay, I want to make sure that I can focus on third year. Let me go and get a really great internship. So I managed to get an internship at Barclays and HSBC that summer, and was fortunate at the end of it to be offered a role with both of them for a graduate scheme. So I went into third year, so I was like, okay, set. And when I came into HSBC, I mean, it's a great organisation to work for. It's huge. It's very well established. But I realised after a few years that as much as I loved parts of what I did, so I started as a commercial manager. So I was working, so you go to a high street HSBC and come and talk to the bank manager. I was one of the ones who looked after business banking. So like I looked after business customers. And I always enjoyed those conversations with those business owners and talking to them about what they're doing and like, how can I help you do more of this? But then when it started to transition to more of a sales job, then that's when I fell out of love with it, because I was like, well, Mr. C doesn't need a business credit card. He just needs X, Y, Z. So I did my final I moved into project management within HBC. So I was on Apple Pay. So when Apple Pay launched, I was on the team at HBC to launch that with HBC, which was amazing. And I was looking after the marketing work stream. And that's when I was like, I love marketing. I really love marketing. And all these things I was doing with these business customers was marketing. I was like basically helping them build their brand and helping them to get more customers. And if you've ever worked at a big company like that, to train and to change the path that you're on is quite hard. So I took the decision to leave, and I was going to sort of figure out how to move into marketing my way. So at that point, I'd already sort of been at HSBC. My parents have been like, my daughter's a bank manager. They've done all that, bought a house and all that. So at this
they've
point,
had the benefit of it.
I have 5 other siblings, like they can focus on those guys. My brother was on track to be a doctor and decided not to be. So my mum was thinking about doing that as a separate thing. Like, okay, it'll be fine. So yeah, he's very successful doing what he was doing, but he just decided it wasn't the thing for me. But yeah, you're right. They're very much, what are you going to do? What are you focused on? And by this time, I think I've proven that the decisions that I've made were good ones. So when I said, look, I'm leaving, and it sort of tied in with the maternity leave, so there was less sort of, okay. But then I'm not going back. That was more of a, okay, all right, that's fine.
But you never stop being Big Four, right? You've got the background in it. So I never took that route at all. And my parents are quite chilled. I'm quite blessed that way. They're kind of like, you have to go to uni, but you can choose what you want to do. So my parents are both Big Four, lawyer, engineer, but I never had that kind of pressure. But it's just that, when you meet other Nigerian aunties and uncles, they're like, oh, you've graduated. What are you doing? You're like, I'm an analyst. They're like, I know what? Like, what?
But listen, the tide is turning. My son is 8. He plays football. He's really good at football. And, as his parents, we're like, okay, we're going to help support him down that path. I mean, he does well academically, but, my husband was like never in his day, because he played football when he was young, but like never would it even be a consideration for a Nigerian parent. Yeah. So you want to play football. Whereas we're like, yeah, you want to play football? Sure. Let's see what we can do. So it's such different generations around career and what to do. And I think that particularly our generation, we realise that there's so much out there, and you're never going to necessarily spend all of you won't spend all your life at the same place. You just won't. And actually, rather than chasing titles, you're chasing skills. Like, what do I want to learn? What do I want to, how do I want to grow? What experience do I want to get? And that's sort of been something that I've always had at the back of my mind, that I'm chasing skills. How can I gather as much expertise and experience? Because that actually helps me a lot more. That's been my journey there.
I feel like the kind of Nigerian upbringing, it teaches you excellence, because it's like you should be first at whatever you do. And I love that now that's getting broader into not just the Big Four, but into, if you want to play football, be great at football. If you want to play basketball, be great at that. If you want to be a leadership, be excellent. Like, don't carry last is what I always remember from my parents. Like, do they have 2 brains? No, like you can.
Where's the
You
other
know.
2%? Mum, I got 98%.
Yeah.
I'm like, but I got 98%.
Yeah. Where's the other two? Just slightly switching up a little bit. So, what does emotional intelligence mean to you?
Yeah, emotional intelligence. For me, it really is around how you manage yourself and manage your feelings, because often we make decisions where that whole thing of like how you think influences, how you act, and your action will influence the results. So often our behavior comes down to how we think. And sometimes the way we think about something is not necessarily factual, it's not the truth. And so being able to manage that, having that self-awareness around why am I thinking this way, or what am I making this thing to mean, is really important. And as a leader, equally important, because you set the tone, your team are following and are watching you, and everything comes from like that leadership presence that you have. So someone who has good, emotional, intelligence is able to read themselves, but also read the room, read the people that they're working with, and be able to understand, what's important to this person. If you know your team well, for example, you're able to quickly identify when something's wrong, and then be fast to sort of fix it. So I think understanding yourself and being able to understand others well is what I would say.
Love that. And one of the things you said was about the leadership tone that you wanted to set. So if you had to describe your like aspirational leadership tone for you as a person, what would be like the 3 words that you would use to describe that?
Inspirational.
Okay.
So when people are around me and we discuss or talk, they leave inspired. They feel like motivated to go and take action. Another thing I would say is integrity. So when people again interact with me, they know that if she says she's going to do something, she's going to do it. I can trust this person. Trust is such an important value when you work with others. And then a third thing, gosh, good one. You say like how do I want people to feel, or what do I want my?
So like, how would you describe your style? So that's part of like, how would you want people to feel? How would you, if people described you, how would they describe your leadership style?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I would say then the third thing, one word, is intentional, and intentional in the sense that I'm always wanting others to be able to learn from themselves. And what I mean by this is, and I see this even with parenting, it's really easy to step in and do stuff for people. And it's really easy to sort of take over, I can do this myself. But with my leadership, I really want others to feel empowered. So I think probably the word is empowered, actually. You're empowered to go and do the thing that you want to do. And actually, you believe that you're able to do that, and you're not stuck in the shadows of somebody else. So anybody who's ever worked with me will tell you, or I'd like to believe they would tell you, is that they felt empowered working with me, that they felt that they were trusted to go and do the work that they were asked to do. They felt that they had the resources, they had my support, and that they knew that I had their back. And because of all of that, there's that kind of safety to go and do a great job, which I think is really important.
Definitely. And kind of along your journey, where was the first like conscious awareness that you had of emotional intelligence and how important that was?
When I was at HSBC, actually. So when I was managing a team there, I was managing 3 people, and 3 very different people. So one was a lady who's been at HSBC for years, probably retirement's like around the corner. So her motivations for being there were very different to the graduate who was also my team, who's again different focus for him of what he wants to do and what he wants to achieve. And then I had another guy who hadn't graduated, hadn't gone to university, but was very driven and wanted to go, progress within the organization. So I quickly learned that 3 different people, they all have different ways of how they work. They have different motivations for even being here at HSBC. And me as their manager, I have a lot of influence in helping to support them achieve what they want to do, as much as I want them to help me achieve what I want to do. So this thing around, people talk about leadership shadow all the time. When you are interacting with others, what kind of shadow are you casting? Is it a positive one? Is it a negative one? And I recognize that I needed to set the tone for what I deemed as excellent, what I expected. Because often when people don't do things, or they don't do things in the way that you want them to do, the first thing I would say to leaders, you've got to look in the mirror. Did I make it clear like what I wanted? And then secondly, if I did I give them the right support and tools, and did I train them how to do that? So that was when I really learned about the importance of just setting that expectation of how we're going to operate, what we're going to do, what's not accepted. Culture of a team, again, is really important. So where you're bringing people together, maybe historically they, because one of the people in our team is very jaded. You know, when you've worked somewhere for a long time, you can be very kind of like, it's very going through this again, or so you're kind of really having to kind of like, I get that you've been here 25 years. I really respect that. But it's like, how can we look at this in a different way? How can we get together and work through this another way? So that was the very first time that it really became apparent to me just how influential a leader is to somebody. And it can be influential negatively or positively, because I know that we all have those managers, and you've probably been very lucky because I know you've talked about this, managers who haven't been great or have left a really bad experience. And every decision you make, everything that you say, how you come up to every meeting is really important and sets the tone for that.
And I think, as sad as it is that people have those bad management experiences or leadership experiences, I feel like sometimes what we're not really taught how to do is how to see every experience as a learning or as an opportunity, because you're either learning, okay, I'm being shown what to do, or I'm being shown what not to do. And I feel like sometimes we're not really taught that. We're just kind of in the moment. We just are like, but why is this happening to me? Like, we focus on some of those things. But I feel like through sport, I've also been taught, like, look, you miss or you make the shot, like, it's a lesson. Something good happens, great. Something bad happens, it's also okay. Like, take the learnings and then you use that for the future. But I feel like we're not necessarily taught that kind of mindset growing up, in terms of, well, when these bad things happen, these are some of the things that you can look for within that. That means that it's not like not a wasted opportunity, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Nothing is ever wasted. And I always just said this to people, that you either kind of achieve whatever you're trying to achieve, or you learn something.
100%.
And it's never like a loss. So even in the worst situations, I give an example of a good manager. So when I was at HBC, I was a graduate at the time. I was kind of with 2 roles after that. I made the mistake of sending out a document, I remember, an Excel file, and I didn't encrypt it. And what it had was everybody's performance ratings, like I was managing. So I'd sent it out to like the leaders of the commercial centers. One of them had just shared it on with his team, because it was like in the second tab. So there was something that he needed in the first tab, and then the second tab was those ratings, and I hadn't encrypted it. And so that went out to like the whole of the region within minutes. I was absolutely mortified. I was like in tears. And I remember at the time, my manager, who was like deputy regional director, he just sat me down and said, look, don't worry, it's happened. We can fix this. And we just, here's what we need to do. So I always remember this story for many reasons. One, of how he treated me in that moment, of the fact that, look, you're always going to get people make mistakes. We are always going to make mistakes. And the kind of, what you remember from that situation is how you're meant to feel and how you were treated in that situation. So he was very gracious. He was very patient. He understood like the seriousness of it. And I had to call up every single management trainee and have a conversation and apologize. But it also taught me a lesson around just the practical aspect of like encryption work, but the fact that, the humility of having to go back and apologize when you make a mistake, as big as that. And I think that's really important. And the very best leaders recognize that when they make a mistake, well, they will make mistakes, because that's with just human nature, but you can fix it. And I always have this mindset, like, everything's figure outable. Like,
I love that.
Fix anything. And that for me has always got me through everything, because when anything happens, the biggest feeling you can have that will kind of crush you is that I don't have choices. I don't have options anymore. Now, if you remove that and really, okay, there's always a choice. Now, I might not like the outcome of this choice, but there's always a choice. And once you realize that, then you're actually, okay, what is the best thing for me to do right now? And am I happy with what the outcome of this is going to be? So anything that happens, and I have a very regular reflective practice. Every week, I will always be like, what went well this week? What did I learn this week? What did I learn about myself this week? Because the biggest way that a leader can increase their impact is to get to know themselves better. And it's not about kind of like being more aggressive and driving this. No, so yes, those things you get results. Okay. There's a lot of leaders I'm sure we could name who get really great results from that sort of go forcing sort of energy sort of thing. But the individual who knows themselves and knows what their triggers are and knows how to sort of support themselves so that they can show up every day to support the team, to support the business, is much more effective and can be more successful long term. Okay.
I think it also depends on how you quantify results, right? So I feel like there's kind of the externally visible results, like, yeah, they're making money, you know, this looks good. But then I think that for me, that's not the holistic result, right?
Sure.
The result is like, okay, you're making loads of money, but are your team happy? Like, do people actually want to work with you and follow you? Like, are your team's lives holistically good? You know, like, I think we focus so much on this is what success looks like. But I think as a leader, like, I want my success to be holistic. I want it to be like, yes, we achieved everything that we wanted to do, but it wasn't because, you know, 3 people broke down along the way because I'm stressing them out, you know? And I think sometimes in the short term, it looks like you might not be as successful, but I think longer term, like you said, the success really like starts to show. And I think that's something that's really important, is that patience of don't grow tired, you know, of doing the right thing, because it comes later, you know?
That's true. You're always sowing seeds. I really love that you said that, Paula, because often when a new manager comes in to manage a team, and I'm doing like new manager training, for example, or coaching them or anything, I always like to ask them, so what's your focus for the next 90 days? And it's like, I'm going to achieve this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to achieve this, I'm going to do that. I was like, okay, great. Let's take a step back. Like, what does success mean to you? Because this is where it's really important to define that. And obviously, your manager will have a version of success. For them, they were like, well, we need to do the X, Y, Z things. But for you as an individual, how will you know that you're doing a good job? And how are you able to measure that within your team? And so this is where we always then kind of flip back the question around, you know, the importance of laying those really strong foundations with your team, being able to really understand the importance of bringing them together, to having that culture together, to being clear what your vision is and they knowing what that is and being able to follow you. Because once you get that done, and that takes an investment of time, everything else is really easy. So, you know, Patrick Lencioni talks about, if you've ever read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, he talks about the 5 things that kind of cause dysfunction. And the first thing is the lack of trust.
Lack of trust, yeah.
You've got to make sure that you have that. And there's different things that he talks through, but in essence, all of these things are not really focused on like the end result. Those things come, the result comes. But if you focus on these, they're what really help you. So I know, I mean, when we went into COVID, for example, lockdown, this is where empathy as a leader was so critical. Because fine, you know, we're going through a global pandemic. You're dealing with your own stuff anyway. But then you're managing the lives of others as well. And before it was like, okay, you know, what we're doing, you know, the focus on the projects that we're working on, our KPIs, all that sort of stuff, yeah. But now you're dealing with them as humans in the realest sense of the word. Not that you weren't before, but do you understand? So when you're saying like, how are you? It's not necessarily
like, how are you? Like, really?
It's a really deep question that you need to listen and understand, because, and it's not about, oh, it was a pandemic and everything else like that, but that really highlighted the importance of those relationships as a manager and the role that you play. I remember one of my mentors, he used to talk about, when he used to deliver leadership training, and then we used to do it together sometimes. And he would say to these new managers that you don't realize the importance you are in the lives of your people. Think about it, you know, they'll go home and go, you know, Chichi said this to me today, and Chichi was telling me about this, and Chichi this, and so you may have never met their spouse, their kids, or what have you, but they know you. They know you. And so you're like, what is the legacy that you want to have, and how do you want to be? Or like, rather like, oh my gosh, Chichi did this really stupid thing, you know what I mean? And when they hear that, and then they take a step back and realize the level of influence, impact, but just like this precious thing that you hold in terms of being able to manage others, so important.
I love that. You're right. It is such a precious thing. The dynamic and the relationship that you get to have in people's lives, like it's such a precious responsibility. Massively. And for me, that's why it's so important that we learn leadership, because I feel like as you grow through your career, you get promoted because I hit sales targets. I'm good at this. I'm good at that. No one really actually knows really what you're like as a leader until you're in that position, but you don't get, I feel like you don't really get equipped unless you have really good leaders. In that, you're just there because I'm good at this, delivering that. So I feel it's so important for people to learn leadership.
Yeah. Whenever I do onboarding, the very first module is mindset of a manager, because like you've just come from, most of you being an individual contributor, now you're managing. And there's some things that we actually need to let go of in order for you to be an effective manager. And whether you've come from like, you're now managing a peer, for example, so someone that last week you were friends working together, you're now managing them. Recognizing that actually success of results come from how you create the environment for your team to drive those results, how you delegate, how you allow, you set the vision, but there's many ways to roam, sort of thing. So that mindset piece is really, really important, because a lot of things change. And often there's that whole debate of like, a leader's born or a leader's made. But there are things you can learn, and you need to learn to be an effective leader. Because yes, you could get things done through fear and lots of shouting and lots of work. That's not leadership. That's just a whole other thing. So there's that piece of you need to shift the way you think now, actually, in order to do this role.
What are some of the key things that you feel people need to let go of in that transition? Because I love that there is this new, when I was growing up, there wasn't this language of individual contributor. I feel like that's been quite a new, in the last 5-10 years, that real understanding of at work, you can be an individual contributor, or you kind of do leadership and different things like that. So what do you think are some of the things that people need to let go, making that transition from individual contributor to more like a leader?
Yeah, big one is the need to be liked.
Oh,
because
okay.
As a manager, and I'm using the word manager and leader interchangeably, because I believe everyone can be a leader, but not everyone's manager. So, as a human being, we have this tendency to want to be liked. It's just the way we're wired. Now, as a manager, if you're striving for that and for everybody to like you above everybody respecting you, because it's not to say that they won't like you, but respect is the one we're going for first and foremost.
First, love that.
It makes it really difficult for you to make good decisions, because every time you go to think about a decision, you're putting it through the lens of like, what will so-and-so think? What will so-and-so believe? So that mindset of being liked, you need to park it. And it's not to say that you don't want to be a kind, empathetic manager, but again, with parenting, and there's so many parallels, there's some decisions that I make because they're the right thing for you as my child. You might not like it, but because this is the role that I've been entrusted to have and to look after you and raise you, that's the right thing to do. And as a leader, if you set the tone with your team right at the beginning that my role as your manager is to support you, I've got your back, I'm here to create the environment for us to thrive and succeed, and I do genuinely care about you, when you are making those difficult decisions, they will be accepted a lot more because they know the intent from which it's come from. Now, if you haven't built the relationship to be able to have that understanding, then that's where the problems lie. So you've got to get rid of that, wanting to be liked. Another thing that's really important is this, as an individual contributor, your results are a direct result of your actions. Now, when you become a manager, you're going to find yourself doing less, doing less of the do. And that's actually sometimes hard for people who are used to doing. And I felt this as well. When I became a manager of managers, I was like, I'm not doing anything. I don't
It's almost like you feel guilty. You're like, I'm not actually doing stuff.
Not doing anything. And I'm like, and again, this is why it's great to be surrounded by more experienced leaders and mentors. Like, you're not supposed to be doing anything, Chichi.
No.
Your role is to make sure that they're doing stuff and that they have the right environment to do, and you have the space to think and the space to plan and strategize. Things I see, leaders I've coached, they struggle with having that space to think, reflect, and I'm like, that's what's going to help you better. Because if you're constantly going, you can't take a step back to analyze, is this working? If it is working, why is it working? Okay, then we can do more of it. This isn't working. Why is it not working? How do we change that? So that's so important. So realizing that my success now is down to these guys, and how do I make sure that they're able to do that really well?
Do you know what? It's it's so interesting because I was in a role where I'd kind of grown up through the ranks, so I could do all of the doing. And because I could do it, I almost like couldn't help myself but to jump in and do stuff.
Yeah.
And then I had to move to a role. Well, I moved to a role where I was the head of department, but I couldn't do the things that my team could do. And it's made me so much better because I can't just jump in and do the do. I have to get it done through my team. And that for me has been such an interesting shift. And it might have been similar for you when you shifted from HSBC into marketing, where it's like, you can't actually like do the do like everybody else. So you have to rely on your team. So that was a really like a forced shift for me, but it's been the best.
Yeah. It's such a good one because it reminds you why you're brought into the role that you're doing. So when I became head of data programs in Multiverse, so I was looking after like all of our digital programs and data sat in that suite of products. I don't know anything about data. And I remember kind of sitting down with like our head of learning products and I'm like, can you explain this program to me like in really simplistic terms? And they'll say this and they'll say these different things and it just didn't make any sense. And I remember listening to a podcast where this woman had been hired into an organization where she didn't have any background. She came into a very senior role and the interviewer said, did you not like have like imposter syndrome or worry about that? And she says, actually, no, because I didn't know this stuff. And this is what I found to be my experience as well. Because I didn't know, you ask better questions.
Yes.
You do things.
Yes.
In a kind of like, because it's like, oh, it's always been done that way. But you're like, well, why are we doing it that way? It doesn't make sense. So you come with this sort of fresh perspective. Yes. And then to the point, you do have to depend on the leaders that are within your team who are the subject matter expertise and allow them to do that. And so that really then forces that delegation piece. And I'd always remind myself that they brought me into this role because I'm a very strong people leader. I'm very good at developing people and scaling teams. So that is why I'm in this role. I'm not a data expert.
That's okay.
Stuff, but not to say no detail, but you know enough to have a really good conversation. But also then it allows you to have that humility of like, I don't know. You need to explain this to me in a way that I do understand so I can make a decision or we're not doing it. And that then forces people to be like, okay, this is what we're doing. Like 5-year-old, you break it down. So it's a good one.
And I think that's such a good exercise for anybody to be able to explain what you do so simply that anybody who isn't close to it can still get it. And that's also how, senior leadership recognizes the value of what you do because you can explain it to someone who has no idea what you do. But I feel like I'm a data person and, you're taught all the detail and like, this is so important, this really little minute thing that nobody else will ever care about other than like another really detailed data person. But you're not then taught, okay, zoom it out 10 levels and explain it to anybody on the street. And that's such a key skill, I think.
Yeah. Another thing that I think is really important when you become a leader now is just being this visionary piece. So you just want to go like, you're often in the detail as an IC. Now as a manager, you don't need to be in the detail as much. You need to have enough information so you know what's happening. You can make decisions. But a lot of the time I found myself just in a really senior role. So when I was director of delivery, I was like, okay, I've got to think about tomorrow, but I've also got to think about today. So I need to think about how I create the space and time to do that. But when I think about today, I'm not in the detail. And then that's hard because in Multiverse, I did go through the ranks in that sense. Sort of when it was just me being a coach and then, I'm managing coaches and then you're managing coaching the coaches, so how everything operates and runs. But I think the beautiful thing there is that because you know how things operate and run, there's a huge amount of respect that you're given because they know, well, actually this person's done this job, so they know what's involved. But at the same time, you have to force yourself to get out of the detail, to allow those leaders underneath you to do their job. And another lesson I learned in that when I have a leadership team is that who you have in your leadership team is so critical. If you have the wrong people in those jobs, you're kind of like, you will not be successful. And somebody might have been good in a job when they first came into it. And we were growing at such a fast rate that jobs then become too big for people. And that's happened. And it's how do you have that conversation and how do you manage that? And I struggle with that actually, because you've got these people that, again, they've grown up into these roles and they're great leaders, but now the job's too big. And it's how do you manage that and how do you do it in a kind way to help them find the right thing for them, and then get the right leader into those roles.
How did you do that?
It's a good question. So I've done it right in some circumstances, and I could have done it better in others. So in the ones where I would say it was done in the best way, this is where the relationship with the person is really key, around understanding their motivations and what's going on. Because often when people are struggling, and you can see them struggling, they know they're struggling, and sometimes all they want is for somebody to like come and help them, to like, okay, we're struggling, let's fix this problem. So having those conversations regularly, and also, sometimes I'd have one-to-ones where I say, we're not talking about business today, we're talking about you, and I'm talking about where you want to go, and what's important for you, and are you enjoying what you're doing, and where you're struggling. If you could wave a magic wand and change things. And in those scenarios, the individual is able to say, like, this is no longer like anymore, I'm no longer enjoying it. Okay, what are you enjoying? What are you good at? What are you doing? Because again, the fear of being able to even say that is to bravery. Because again, in certain cultures, you say that, it's like, oh right, okay, out of this role faster than you can blink your eyes. But it's not even about that. It's about supporting that individual around what is the best thing for them. And we all grow, and we all move into different things, and we all have to make a decision that actually, I did this, like, this role is no longer the right role for me right now in this season of life. Let me change. So for that individual, they were able to really have that clarity for themselves, and then go away and come back and say, this is what I want to do. But it takes time, and you've got to be patient, and you've also got to recognize that there's a human being at the back of that who is going through the fear of like, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to do this? But then nobody wants to be underperforming, and nobody wants to be, in a situation where they're not doing their best. I had another individual who, again, another positive one, where he was struggling in the role that we'd placed him in. So he'd applied for one role. We needed that role, but something else. And so we said, okay, would you be able to do this additional role? So it was a kind of a role that now required him to manage some people. But he was coming externally, and typically we tend to promote with it from within. And actually, it's quite hard sometimes in that organization to come in as a manager. It's not impossible, but it's harder. And so part of that kind of journey with him was recognizing that, did we really set him up properly? Because he was coming in brand new, picking up this role and this leadership role, and actually it was really hard. And going back to him and having that conversation of like, what do you want to do? And then for this individual, it means losing some of that, no longer manager anymore. But for some people, sometimes that's what they want to do. They just like, I don't want the stress anymore, and I want to be doing something where I'm succeeding. So often, as a manager, we will avoid to have that conversation, and I will say to those individuals, like, the person is struggling, and I'm sure you'll have that conversation, and they'll be really relieved they can now talk about this and sort it out. So yeah. And then on the bad side, like, someone's struggling, I just let it go on for too long. I was like, okay, let me keep trying, and it just wasn't working. And I should have really cut the cord earlier to say, like, we need to like
change something.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that comes down to just I think sometimes lack of experience as a leader when I made that decision. And when you experience it the first time, the next time it rears its head, you're like, I've been here before. Your brain's like, you've seen this before, Chichi. Like, here's how you need to approach it this time. So
I think it's so interesting, because obviously this is like a leadership podcast, right? And it's focused on like leading yourselves first and things like that. I think when we talk about like individual contributors versus leadership, there's nobility in both. Like sometimes we talk a bit like leadership might be better than the individual contributor, but like it's really just about being good at what you do. And sometimes like some people don't want to do the leadership part of it, and that's absolutely fine. And the win-win for you and the company is both them being in the role that they're good at and they can maximize, and you not having to deal with all the stuff that comes with people being out of role. Like that's a win-win for everybody. The company gets the best, the employee gets the best. And I think sometimes we really need to recognize that, look, there's nobility in both. Like it's just very different types of people, very different skill sets in some ways.
Of course. And that's a really important conversation that organizations have to have, because it's really easy to be like, oh, the manager path is the golden path. If you don't go on the golden path of manager, you're not worthy to progress your career. that isn't true at all. I know some really incredible principals, and they would be horrible at managing people because that's just not what they are good at.
What they do.
But they're very good at leading and driving projects, initiatives, and all that sort of thing, which you have to get people involved in anyway. So I often say, look, as a manager, you're managing people, and as an individual contributor, you're managing projects, but it still involves people. So when I've done manager training with ICs, so leadership training with ICs, this commonality around, communication and being able to put decisions and having empathy. Fine, you're not managing somebody, but you're still working with other humans. So you need to be able to have those skills. And that's something that I think people forget about. Like, an individual contributor does need to develop certain leadership skills. They need to be able to, build their network and be able to manage upwards. They need to be able to, give difficult feedback. Fine, you're not managing a person, but you still need to give feedback. So that's a skill that you need to learn. So, yeah. And
people will still look up to you as well, even because as you get more senior, whether you manage people or other people that aren't in your team, they're going to look up to you as well.
Yeah. But I guess if you look at some of the really senior roles, C-suite roles, for example, they have had to manage. They have managed people on that journey, and that's just the reality. So the more senior you go, you will have to step your toe into managing.
100%. 100%. I think it's great that there's a lot more companies that have career paths for individual contributors, so like you can get paid more, become more senior and that kind of stuff, and not have to manage people, which is cool. But like you said, I think if you want to go like CEO suite, C-suite, that kind of thing, like it's going to come with some people-y stuff anyway. So you mentioned about the department that you were in scaled from like 2 people to like 200 people. What were some of the things that you looked for when you were hiring people in terms of EQ? Like how did you hire for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at Multiverse, we have a framework called ICE. So ICCE, so intelligence, character, coachability, and experience. And intelligence and character, the first two, are sort of the more important in the sense that when you look at intelligence and character, so if you think about childhood and individual, and as we grow as individuals, by the time you reach a certain age, your character and who you are has already been formed. That's very difficult to change to an extent. Added to that, when we look at character, and anybody who's ever been interviewed at Multiverse will talk to this in terms of the questions that they're asked. We're really trying to understand the individual and what things that they've already experienced that will give us an indication of how well they will fare at Multiverse. So,
give me one of the questions.
Sorry?
Give me one of the questions. Like, ask me one of the questions.
What? Okay. A simple question we'll ask is give an example of something that you're really, really proud of that you've accomplished. And that sounds very kind of basic question, but what we're looking for there is, when someone says, okay, I run the London Marathon, or I played in the National Philharmonic Orchestra when I was 12 or something, it kind of speaks to the individual around like resilience, their grit, kind of go to do something that they didn't need to go and do, but they went to go and do it. Because when we look at someone coming into a fast-growing scale-up like that, there's certain qualities that you need to be able to have to be able to survive. And I say survive in the nicest possible way, but like, to thrive. Let me put it that way. So character and intelligence. So intelligence, how they're processing information, just little things like when we're interviewing and I'm taking notes, I always ask at the end, do you have any questions for me? If people don't have questions for me, that's a red flag for me. Because even if you asked loads of questions up, because usually I was towards the end of the stages, if you've asked loads of questions to my colleagues about the role, about this, there's definitely something you can ask me, even one question. So I think that's interesting. I also like to ask people, like I flip a question and say like, if I was to talk to your friends, and so I'm gonna ask some of your friends, think of a hind Holly for this role. Like, what would you say are his areas of development? Like, what would you say he's really good at? Again, this is for me to understand like their level of self-awareness. In coachability, because at Multiverse we have a really high feedback culture. It's how we work with our apprentices, but also internally, how do they respond to feedback in the live interview? Or if I give ask them to give an example of when they've had to, they got feedback that wasn't great, like what did they do and what was the situation? All of these things. So we were always about hiring what we call A players. These are
Okay.
people who have
What does that mean?
So, and it's a good question. Like, what is an A player? Everyone wants to hire an A player, but we broke it down to somebody who has all those characteristics, because you find that in the context of an A player, there's somebody who, and again, my experience is at the bottom, because somebody working 20 years at IBM just means they've worked 20 years at IBM. Doesn't mean that they're really good. It just means they've just worked at IBM for a really long time. If you're able to demonstrate those behaviors and characteristics in the interview around, okay, I've pushed myself, I've challenged myself, I was knocked down, I put myself up, I did this, I've asked really good questions, that sort of thing. When they come into the organization, you can throw anything at them and they'll be able to know what to do.
They'll figure it out. Yeah.
That's the thing. So we also have this thing of like, you can have a perfect plan and B players and an imperfect plan and A players, and you still get further with the A players. Just because of how they think and how they manage things and how they deal with themselves. And that's a really, really important thing. So it's interesting because the recruitment thing, you could take it outside of that. Like even when I was looking at like babysitters, I use ICE. I'm like, character, because people think innately who somebody is. And so, when you ask that question of like, tell me something that's really, something you're really proud of. Now, there's different levels of what that could mean. But what we're trying to understand is this something that required you to, is it something that anybody could have just gone and done? Because then, okay, is it something that required you to kind of step outside of your comfort zone and who you are and push yourself and all that sort of thing? All of those things. Because that's really important, because the cost of replacing somebody is so high. And in an organization like that, where you're moving at such a fast pace, it could just have such a negative impact on the rest of the team and everything you're trying to push forward for. So you'd rather want to spend time. And that's why the process, if you've ever spoken to anyone that's gone through the multi-roles process, it's like 5 or 6 stages.
Wow.
Meeting different people. And it's very different kind of interview style, because lots of people are looking for ICE and you kind of want to make sure that this person will thrive in that organization.
That's amazing. That was really, really useful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just as we close, what's the best leadership advice that you've been given?
So many. Okay, I'm going to summarize like 2 or 3, if that's all right. So first one mentor told me to always develop yourself out of your job. So meaning that don't have this mindset of like, everything has to be me and I'm indispensable. Like, the very best leaders are developing themselves out of their job. And that allows you to develop others, create opportunities for your team, all that sort of thing, delegate. Second really great piece of advice that I was given by another mentor was plan before people, meaning that, and let me explain. So you want to make sure, so how I give that example of like sometimes an organization has grown and the wrong people are now in the roles because the roles have now changed. So what he meant by that, and I'm not saying the right phrase properly, because he always says to me, like, remove the people, take emotion out of it, and plan, like, what do you need for this team to function well? Like, what type of roles do you need?
Like, if you were starting from scratch, what would you do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then bring the people back in, because often we just create functions around people versus like what's actually needed for this business to run properly. And that was a huge lesson for me, because then you end up, then you can find the right people for the roles, and then you can quickly see, actually, no, this person's no longer right for this role, but they might be better for this role. So that was that one. And then the final thing was you've got to teach people how you want them to work with you. Okay, so as a leader, this thing about, like I said, your leadership shadow, and kind of know who you are, so that you can tell others how best to operate and work with you, is really key. Because you set the bar. All right, the box definitely stops with you, but you are the one who decides what excellence looks like. You know what is expected, all those sorts of things. So you need to be able to know that for yourself, and then be able to articulate that well. And the very best leaders can do that, set that vision, and allow people to follow along. So I've had so many amazing leaders and mentors who have given me so many advice, but they're the 3 that just quickly came to my head. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts. It's been really insightful. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode. Bye.